वेलकम टू माय यूट्यूब चैनल द सोलफुल डायरी। आज के वीडियो में हम फेमिनिस्ट क्रिटिसिज्म या फिर फेमिनिज्म के बारे में डिस्कस करते हैं। चलिए शुरू करते हैं आज के वीडियो। The women's movement of the 1960s was not, of course, the start of feminism. Rather, it was a renewal of an old tradition of thought and action already possessing its classics books which had diagnosed the problems of women inequality in society and in some cases proposed solution. Some important books on feminism are Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women 1792, Virginia Woolf's A Rooms of One Own 1929, and The Second Sex 1949 by Simon de Beauvoir. The feminist literary criticism of today is the direct product of the women's movement of the 1960s. This movement was an important base literary from the start in the sense that it realized the significance of the images of women promulgated by literature and saw it as vital to combat them and question their authority and their coherence. In this sense, the women's movement has always been crucially concerned with books and literature so that feminist criticism should not be seen as an offshoot or a spin-off from the feminism which is remote from the ultimate aims of the movement but as one of its important practical ways of influencing everyday conduct and attributes. The concern with conditioning and socialization underpins a crucial set of distinctions that between the terms feminist, female, and feminine. As Tori Moore explains, the first is a political position, the second a matter of biology, and the third a set of culturally defined characteristics. The representation of women in literature then was felt to be one of the most important forms of socialization since it provided the role models which indicated to women and men what constituted acceptable versions of the feminine and legitimate feminine goals and aspirations. Feminists pointed out, for example, that in 19th century fiction, very few women work for a living unless they are driven to it by dire necessity. Do you know who was the first female writer to make writing her profession? It was Afra Bain. The focus of interest is on the heroine's choice of marriage partner, which will decide her ultimate social position and exclusively determine her happiness and fulfillment in life, or her lack of these. Thus, in feminist criticism in the 1970s, the major effect went into exposing what might be called the mechanisms of patriarchy, that is, the cultural mindset in men and women which perpetuated sexual inequality. Critical attention was given to books by male writers in which influential or typical images of women were constructed. Necessarily, the criticism which undertook this work was combative and polemical. In the 1980s, in feminism, as in other critical approaches, the mood changed. Feminist criticism became much more electric, meaning that it began to draw upon the findings and approaches of other kinds of criticism, Marxism, structuralism, linguistics, and so on. Switched its focus from attacking male versions of the world to exploring the nature of the female world and outlook and reconstruction the lost or suppressed records of female experience. Attention was switched to the need to construct a new canon of women's writing by rewriting the history of the novel and of poetry in such a way that neglected women writers were given new prominence. The distinct phases of interest and activity seem characteristic of feminist criticism. Ellen Showalter, for instance, described a change in the late 1970s and as a shift of attention from androtext, that is, books by men, to gynotext, books by women. She coined the term gynocritics, meaning the study of gynotext, but gynocriticism is a broad and varied field and any generalization about it should be treated with caution. The subjects of gynocriticism are, she says, the history of style, themes, genres, and structures of writing by women, the psychodynamics of female creativity, the trajectory of the individual or collective female career, and the evolution of laws of a female literary tradition. Showalter also detects in the history of women's writing a feminine phase, 1840 to 1880, in which women writers imitated dominant male artistic norms and aesthetic standards. Then a feminist phase, 1880 to 1920, in which radical and often separatist positions are maintained. And finally, a female phase, 1920 onwards, which looked particularly at female writing and female experience. The reasons for this linking for phrasing are complex. Partly it is the result of the view that feminist criticism required a terminology if it was to attain theoretical respectability. There is a great need in intellectual disciplines to establish a sense of progress, enabling early and crucial examples of it, in the case feminist criticism, to be given their rightful credit and acknowledgement, while at the same time making it clear that the approach they represent is no longer generally regarded as a model to practice. Feminist criticism since the 1970s has been remarkable for the wide range of positions that exist within it. Feminist criticism, rediscover texts written by women, re-evaluate women's experience, examine representations of women in literature, challenge the views of women as other, examine and challenge patriarchal roles, examine language as a tool of gender construction, discuss social versus biological difference, question the death of the author, question the neutrality of mainstream interpretation. Critics examine how women write their own experience and representation, how women read about themselves, how to make feminist readings visible to readers, how women writers have fared in given eras, how traditional texts by women are subversive of the social order. Waves of feminism. First waves, suffrage, 19th and early 20th century, focused on suffrage alongside other legal rights, mostly active in UK, Canada and US. Movement succeeded in gaining women the right to vote and other legal liberties. Second wave, equal pay, began in the US, then spread in Europe and Asia, focused mainly on sexuality, reproductive rights, and the wage gap. Movement succeeded in securing career options for women and many reproductive rights. Third wave patriarchy fights for equality by focusing exclusively on female victims of gender neutral issues, mostly middle upper class US, rejects labeling by adopting labels and identities, everything in the patriarchy's fault, also rape cultures. Criticism and role of theory. A major division within feminist criticism has concerned disagreements about the amount and type of theory that should feature in it. What is actually called the Anglo-American version of feminism has tended to be more skeptical about recent critical theory and more cautious in using it than have the French feminists, who have adopted and adapted a great deal of mainly post-structuralist and psychoanalytic criticism as the basis of much of their work. The Anglo-Americans, now not all are English of are Americans, maintain a major interest in traditional critical concepts like themes, motive, and characterization. They seem to accept the conventions of literary realism and treat literature as a series of representation of women's life and experience which can be measured and evaluated against reality. They see the close reading and explication of individual literary texts as the major business of feminist criticism. Generally, this kind of feminist criticism has a good deal in common with the procedures and assumptions of the liberal humanist approach to literature, although feminists are also considerable emphasis on the use of historical data and non-literary materials such as diaries, memoirs, social and medical history in understanding the literary text. The American critic Ellen Showalter is usually taken as the major representative of this approach, but other exemplars would be Sandy Gilbert, Susan Gruber, Patricia Stoops, and Rachel Brownston. English feminist criticism is, after all, often distinctively different from American. It tends to be socialist feminism in orientation, aligned with culturalism, materialism, or Marxism, so that it is obviously unsatisfactory to try to assimilate it into non-theoretical category. A similarly important group was the Literature Teaching Politics Collective, which was also a series of conferences and an associated journal. While the definitive works in the so-called Anglo-American tradition appeared in the late 1970s, the British socialist feminist tradition produced its key works in the mid-1980s and remains active and influential. Criticism in language. Another fundamental issue on which opinion is just as polarized in the question of whether or not these texts exist a form of language which is inherently feminine. There is a long standing tradition of debate on the issue within feminism. For instance, Virginia Woolf in section 4 and 5 of her extended polemical essay A Room of One's Own suggests that language use is regarded as so that when a woman turns to novel writing, she finds that there is no common sentence ready for her use. The great male novelists have written in natural prose, swift but not solvently expressive, but not precious, taking their own tint without easing to be common property. She quotes an example and says, that is a man's sentence. She doesn't make it quality explicit, but the example seems to be characterized by carefully balanced and patterned rhetorical sequences. The female writer is seen as suffering the handicap of having to use of medium prose writing, which is essentially a male instrument fashioned for male purposes. This thesis that the language is masculine is this sense is developed by Dale Spender in the early 1980s in her book Man-Made Language 1981, which also argues that language is not a neutral medium but one which contains many features which reflect its role as the instrument through which patriarchy finds expression. This view that the language is man-made is challenged from within feminism by Sandra Gilbert and Suzanne Gruber in the essay Sexual Linguistics, Gender, Language, and Sexuality, reprinted in the Feminist Reader Catherine Belsey and Jane Moray Macmillan 1989, and its femininity social constructed, then it must follow that it differs from one culture to another so that such overreaching generalizations about it are impossible. Vindication of the Rights of Women, Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women is a treatise on overcoming the ways in which women in her time are oppressed and denied their potential in society with con- commitment problems for their households and society as a whole. The dedication is to Charles M. Tyrone Pogert, the late Bishop of Autun, whose views on female education were distasteful to Wollstonecraft. The introduction sets out her view that neglect of girls' education is largely to blame for the condition of adult women. They are treated as subordinate beings who are only about being attractive, elegant, and meek. They but in they put into this oppression and they do not have the tools to vindicate their fundamental rights. Or awareness that they are in such a condition. One's Own by Virginia Woolf. The dramatic setting of A Room of One's Own is that Woolf has been invited to lecture on the topic of women and fiction. She advances the thesis that a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. Her essay is constructed as a partly fictionized narrative of the thinking that led her to adopt this thesis. She dramatizes the mental process in the character of an imaginary narrator. Call me Mary Beaton, Mary Sexton, Mary Carmichael, or by any name you please. It is not a matter of any importance who is in her same position wrestling with the same topic. The narrator begins her investigation at Oxbridge College, where she reflects on the different education experiences available to men and women, as well as one more material difference in their lives. She then spends a day in the British Library uh, pursuing the scholarships on women, all of which has written by men and all of which has been written in anger. Turning to history, she finds so little data about the everyday lives of women that she decides to reconstruct their existence imaginatively. The figure of Judith Shakespeare is generated as an example of the tragic fate a highly intelligent woman would have, not with under those circumstances. In light of this background, she considers the achievements of the major women novelists of the 19th century and reflects on the importance of tradition to an aspiring writer. A survey of the current state of literature follows, conducted through a reading the first novel of one of the narrator's contemporaries, Woolf closes the essay with an exhortation to the audience of women to take up the tradition that has been so hardly bequeathed to them and to increase the endowment for their own daughter. Next by Simon de Beauvoir, revolutionary and imaginary, the second sex is one of the earliest attempts to confront human history from a feminist perspective. It won de Beauvoir many admirers and just as many detractors. Today, many regard the massive and meticulously researched masterwork as not only as pillar of feminist thought but of 20th century philosophy in general. De Beauvoir's primary thesis that men fundamentally oppress women by characterizing them on every level as the other, defined exclusively in opposition to men. Men occupies the role of the self or subject, woman is the object, the other. He is essential, absolute, and transcendent. She is inessential, incomplete, and mutilated. He extends out into the world to impose his will on it, whereas woman is doomed to immanence or inwardness. He creates acts invents, she waits for him to save her. This distinction is the basis of all de Beauvoir's later arguments. De Beauvoir states that while it is natural for humans to understand themselves in opposition to others, this process is flawed when applied to the genders. In defining woman exclusively as other, man is in effect denying her humanity. The second sex chronicles de Beauvoir efforts to locate the source of those profoundly imbalanced gender roles. In Book 1, entitled Facts and Myth, she asks how female humans come to occupy a subordinate position in society. To answer this question and to better understand her own identity, de Beauvoir first turns to biology, psychoanalysis, and historical materialism. These disciplines reveal indisputable essential differences between men and women but provide no justification for women's inferiority. They all take women's inferior destiny for granted. She then moves to history to trace the emergence of male superiority in society from nomadic hunter-gatherers as through the French Revolution and contemporary times. Here she finds ample examples of female subordination, but again, no persuasive justification for them. History, she argues, is not an immutable fact but a reflection of certain attitudes, preconceptions, and injustice. De Beauvoir next discusses various mythical representations of women and demonstrates how these myths have imprinted human consciousness, often to the disservice of women. De Beauvoir hopes to debunk the persistent myth of the eternal feminine by showing that it arose from male discomfort with the fact of his own birth. Throughout history, maternity has been both brings life and heralds death. These mysterious operations get projected onto the woman who is transformed into a symbol of life and in the process of is robbed of all individuality. To illustrate the prevalence of these myths, de Beauvoir studies the portrayal of women by five modern writers. In the end of this section, de Beauvoir examines the impact of these myths on individual experience. She concludes that the external female fiction is reinforced by biology, psychoanalysis, history, and literature. De Beauvoir insists on the impossibility of comparing the character of men and women without considering the immense differences in their situation, and in Book 2, entitled Woman's Life Today, she turns to the concrete realities of this situation. She traces female development through its formative stages, childhood, youth, and sexual initiation. Her goal is to prove that women are not born feminine but shaped by a thousand external processes. She shows how, at each stage of her upbringing, a girl is conditioned into accepting passivity, dependence, repetition, and inwardness. Every force in society conspires to deprive her of subjectivity and flatten her into an object, denied the possibility of independent work or creative fulfillment. The woman must accept a thus satisfying life of housework, childbearing, and sexual slavishness. Having brought the woman to adulthood, de Beauvoir analyzes the various situations or roles The adult woman inhabits the bourgeois woman performs three major functions: wife, mother, and entertainer. No matter how illustrations a woman's household may be, these roles inevitably lead to immense incompleteness and profound frustration. Even those who accept a less conventional place in society as a prostitute or courtesan, for example, must submit to imperatives defined by the male. De Beauvoir also reflects on the trauma of old age. When a woman loses her reproductive capacity, she loses her primary purpose and therefore her identity. In the final chapter of this section, Women's Situation and Character, De Beauvoir reiterates the controversial claim that woman's situation is not a result of her character, rather, her character is a result of her situation. Mediocrity, complacency, lack of accomplishment, laziness, passivity, all of these qualities are the consequences of our subordination, not the cause. In Justifications, de Beauvoir studies some of the ways that women reinforce their own dependency. Narcissus, women in love, and mystics all embrace their immense by drowning selfhood in an external object, whether it be the mirror, a lover, or a god. Throughout the book, de Beauvoir mentions such instances of female being complicit in the otherness, particularly with regard to marriage, the difficulty of breaking free from femininity, of sacrificing security and comfort for some ill-conceived notion of equality, induces many women to accept the unusual and fulfilling roles of wife and mother. From the very beginning of our discussion, de Beauvoir identifies the economic underpinnings of female subordination and the economic roots of women's liberation. Only in work can she achieve autonomy. If woman can support herself, she achieves autonomy. If a woman can support herself, she can also achieve a form of liberation. In the concluding chapters of the second sex, de Beauvoir discusses the logistical hurdles a woman faces in pursuing this goal. The feminist critic Ellen Showalter identifies two varieties of feminism, one of which studies women as a reader and the other one woman as a writer. She terms the first one as feminist critic and the second one as gynocriticism. She states that as a reader, woman studies the text created by male writers. She presents the belief that as a reader, female could change the established idea of a given text. This analysis undertaken by female is what she calls feminist critic. The subjects studied under it include the images and stereotypes that are presented in association with women in literature. It also considers the exclusion of women criticism as well as the misconceptions about them that prevail in the field of criticism. The treatment given to female characters by the male writers in the literary history is also analyzed to find gaps. Showalter has also mentioned that display of women is consumed products is like exploitation of female audience. Women as a writer, gynocritics. When feminist criticism is studied in concern to women writers, Showalter term it as gynocriticism. This is a concept that analyzes themes, genres, and structure created by a woman. Woman here is considered as the producer of a literary text as well as its meaning. Study of women as a writer includes the study of following subjects: the psychodynamics of the behavior of creativity as shown by females, various aspects of female language and problems concerned to it, career of female literary field, literary history, analysis of female writers and their works. Showalter derived the term gynocritics from the French term la gynocritique. She derived the term since the field of study analyzing concepts she summed up did not have any particular term in English till then. The feminist critic is also considered to have political and polemical association. The problems of the feminist critic, since women have played limited role in literary history, this arises a problem. Feminist critic. The problem is that it is a male oriented as it is derived as a matter from what men have felt. Another problem is that role of male theoretician is a must in some fields of specialization. Thus, the study of the various aspects of feminist critic is desired when does not take place. Program of Gynocritics. Gynocriticism said analyzing women's literature that is based on women's experience. Thus, the program that Gynocritics plan include construction of a framework that could analyze women's literature and development of a new models deriving its basis from female experiences. Showalter realizes that gynocritics arrive when the dependence on male literary tradition is discarded, feminine, feminist, and female stages, Showalter is of the view that female tradition has evolved following some identifiable patterns and traces. She divided this period of evolution into three stages: the feminine, the feminist, and the female stage. The feminine phase dates from about 1840 to 1880. Women in this stage wrote to level standards of intellectual achievement with that of male culture. However, inferiority complex in the mind of female writers was quite clear. Use of male pseudonyms on the part of female writers, one of the most unique aspects of the stage. The feminist phrase ranged from 1882 to 1928, followed the efforts to win rights for women. The new women movement has become quite strong, and women had won the right to vote. During the stage, women writers expressed their feelings regarding suffering of women in the society. The female phase has been continuing since 1920. Showalter considers imitation and protest to symbolize dependence of female on male. The women rejected both these phenomena. Women here depend on their own attitude and experiences to Richardson and Virginia Woolf, who represent the stage, also identified uniqueness of female experience. They went to the extent of identifying differences between male and female tendencies. Women in general began to be more about forms and techniques of art and literature. Thus, in the essay, Showalter has summed up the process of evolution of feminism, the reason have endured its development, and also the ways it could would be what it should be. Recap: the concept of feminism in general has been considered to an analysis of the trend of male domination of the society, the general attitude of male towards female, the ways of improving the condition of women in literature, and emerged in 1960. It was a movement in favor of women. Jane Austen, Frances Bernier, Virginia Woolf, George Eliot were the famous feminist writers. Feminism is a belief that women should have equal rights to men. First wave Kate Millett was concerned mainly to the treatment of women at the hands of male marry elements thinking about women. होप आज की वीडियो आपको पसंद आई। कैसी लगी हमें कमेंट करके बताएं। अगर कोई डाउट्स या सजेशंस हो तो वो भी आप कमेंट सेक्शन में ड्रॉप कर सकते हैं। अगर वीडियो अच्छा लगी हो तो लाइक शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब टू माय चैनल। मिलते हैं कल एक और इन्फॉर्मेटिव वीडियो के साथ शाम 4 बजे। टिल देन कीप वॉचिंग एंड कीप सपोर्टिंग द सोलफुल डायरी। थैंक यू।